going to start with the questions. During your speech, you mentioned that funding suffocates the community in terms of growth.
Yeah.
And based on my introduction, I said we run an organization, Collective Art Canada.
Yeah, exactly.
And based on the challenges that we face,
right,
we need funding
absolutely
to grow the organization and also expand the services that we provide to the community. So now, if funding is going to suffocate the community, but they need the funding to kind of grow, so we can't catch 22. So now, where do we go?
Yeah.
That's question number one. Question number two is it a matter of fund misappropriation or like mismanagement by the leaders of these various community employment groups, or is it just the funding itself?
No, it's a good question, and it's a good question. It has troubled me for a long time because I was involved in doing evaluations. In one case, an organization got $4 million. And we were looking at some of the other organizations, the smaller organizations that were competing. And what happened is that at the end of the day, I had asked, why don't we go back to the government and say, if you got $4 million, we should at least get out of it a couple of macro projects, maybe a $1 million or $750,000 to prove the credibility of the black community. But instead what we had was hundreds and hundreds, not necessarily hundreds, but tens of organizations that come forward, and there was a cap of $25,000. So what you have is all these organizations getting $25,000 and could do nothing. Couldn't even hire an expert for half a year to work with them or anything. Now, I also said that there's a place for funding, so I never ruled out funding. And I also said that there's a twin phenomena that is causing this problem, and that is charity law is one of them, and the rules and regulations that dictates how funding is spent. There's an organization that got $4 million recently, and after about 3 years, when they've used up all the money, now they're back to the table and they say they need $375,000 a year to carry on the organization. And I understand the head of the organization actually jumped to another organization because they didn't get as much money. Now, if I had $4 million today, and I was running an organization, I would probably want to buy a couple of franchises in something so that somehow it becomes sustainable. I would probably wish to bring in a few very brilliant black scientists and say, can we look at a couple of products that we could take into the R&D so we can put it to the Bill Gates and the big guys and say, look, could we mass manufacture this, and then now we have sustainability. But you're constrained. Now, I'll say something to you that you've probably never heard before. Do you know under charity law, you cannot try to prevent poverty? You can only address poverty when it happens. Only when you become poor, then I could use charitable dollars to help you. So we don't understand the enormous suffocation that it brings. And we allow it to happen because we have been receiving tens of millions of dollars for the last 50 years. I know because I've been involved in some of these projects, some of these initiatives for the last 50 years. So if you, and that's why I also said to you, if we try to empirically measure the macro level job sustaining infrastructure that was created from all this funding, we would be at a loss. So there's the evidence. So not just someone is speaking. I love funding. I think funding has its place. But funding must be given to us without the constraints. But we must have governance. So I'm not talking about, because there's some mismanagement, but mismanagement is not a big issue. If I were a politician and I had $1 million today, would it be better for me to give it to 2 organizations, $500,000 each, and say go out and do something great? Or would it be better for me to find 50, 60, 100 organizations and give them $10,000 each? Now look at what I have done. Look at the voice that's on my, look at the voices that are speaking on my behalf. So you have to understand what funding does. And that is why I'm about to write an article that says, whose money is it anyway? Because we have made all these promises and all this funding is expended to you. and sometimes the reasons are more overt than we might want to believe. Every time we have a calamity, and I use the word calamity in my presentation, some of the calamities are self-made and inspired by ourselves. But every time we have a calamity, money comes forward. That is appeasement. Why aren't we looking at empowerment zones in black communities? It has been done. There was a time when people in Quebec and Gatineau, they were complaining, and what did the government do? They brought some of the jobs from the capital and they relocated some to the Quebec side of the border. And it's called empowerment zones, created an empowerment zone. The one thing that we don't understand is there are billions of dollars in government contracts. How many of us have ever gone down to the city hall or tried to understand where and who gets all this money? Now there should be, if we are really advocates for black empowerment, we should be going to government and saying, well, what happens if we put in every major contract over $1 million, over 10 million or whatever, that we had a 25% that must go to minority groups, even if it means we have to develop capacity so that they can apply for the share. Because this is what we do with large corporations. We give them lands, we give them all kinds of R&D money to develop a product so they can make billions of dollars. So why are we sitting here as if we are totally confused and accepted mediocrity and accepted the fact that we'll never be empowered, because although we talk about black empowerment, in our hearts we feel that we will never be and we can't be empowered. So the Exchange better do something about this, and I am sharing it with you and hoping that you could answer the transcript and I'll get you a copy in your email and you could think about it with those folks. So I'm not against funding. I wish we could get all the funding that we need and we deserve. But all I'm saying is that let's try and understand it in a different context.
Can we succeed without the one community in vision? Because you start your speech by there. You cannot go anywhere if you don't know where we are going. This is my take. Thank you.
As I said when I opened up, that we are a complex microcosm. The reason why we don't have a community, or we are not a community by classical definition, is very simple. When I worked in the United States, we were going to, let's say, General Motors, and they would want solutions. As a consultant, they're paying you big bucks, and they want solutions right away. But that's what they pay you for. And I was the one person who would always slow everything down and say, unless we have a philosophical understanding of what the problem is, we cannot move towards any solution perspective. The reason why we are where we are, because everyone talks about getting here and there, but no group wants to take the time to come together, very calm and intellectual way, try and understand the problem, try and understand who we are, where we are, what kind of resources it would take, what kind of assets do we need, what are our weaknesses, what are our strengths. We don't have a good spiritual connection to each other. Like for me, every time I see a person, a human being, I see him in a certain context. But when I see a black human being, I see him in a very high context, because we all are suffering together. And I would tell you one thing, we are our greatest enemy, and what I would like, remember I said there are 3 perspectives that would heal us more than all the money we can have and all the great jobs we can have. And that is how we treat each other. Because I have been a victim of this black exploitation, and many of you have been, black guys running Ponzi schemes and whatever. And every time we are robbed by one of our people, the money doesn't even stay in the black community. Because every Lamborghini he or she buys and every mansion they buy goes into the majority culture. But that's where it came from, and it goes back like dust to dust, ashes to ashes. It goes back to the community, because we have no capacity to keep or maintain that which we have stolen. No capacity whatsoever. Not we shouldn't be stealing, but what I'm saying, those who steal from us, and we come in various guises, and we have a broken trust. And until we get past that broken trust, and the only way we can get past a broken trust is through dialogue. We haven't had, in my 50 years in this country, on this continent, no, not 50, 45, on this continent, I've never attended a town hall meeting or a gathering of black folks where the intent was not to form an organization to do anything, but to talk, but to say what are the 10 most critical issues that we need to discuss. We haven't heard it out of the consulates, I'm sorry son, we haven't heard of the consulates, who should be a guide, who should be a bridge to our homes back wherever we come from. We haven't heard it from our community leaders. Like no one in 45 years have brought us together or tried to bring us together and just have a dialogue. I believe there's also a bigger issue in the various perspectives that many of us have with why we are where we are. And some think it has to do with slavery. I think not. It has some contribution, but not the overall. And the reason why I say that is if it had to do with slavery, then every nation and every country did not have slavery. And even where blacks were in charge and they were not so much affected by Europeans' colonization or whatever, the behavior is the same. So even if you took us and you put us at the center of commerce, we still have the same complaints. So there is something much deeper that we need to look into. And we cannot rule out the need or the fact that we are moving so far away. We have adopted the European culture. We move so far away from that inner spiritual strength that we had that kept our families together, that until we start revisiting this, so it's not only the hard sciences and the hard things, also some of the soft things. Because I grew up in a family with 9 brothers and sisters. I was 14 years old when my father died. I had no concept what will become of me. And today my mother raised the 9 of us. What strength, what fortitude did it take for that to happen? And today we complain when we have 1 or 2 kids, and we're struggling. My wife and I have raised 5 children, and they're all professionals. My youngest boy is a professor, and my oldest boy is a quality engineer. The girls are also professionals, raised in Mississauga, gone to the same schools. So there is a formula. There's a way to achieve, the best that we can achieve and live and rise beyond this mediocrity. The fact is we have accepted mediocrity. We may not be aware of it, but we have accepted it. And we have accepted the fact that it's not just a glass ceiling, but it's made of some kind of titanium. And we will never be able to penetrate it. We have to get away from that psychological mindset. Remember our education, even our European education, has somehow capitalized our mind, and it has destroyed the way of thinking and the way we thought when we were growing up in our, in whatever villages or countries we lived in. And we have now moved so far away from it where we lose our point of center. And we need to sort of get back to that. But I will take your email number, and I have some views about why we are in this state. And it's not views I want to express too openly everywhere, but it's some kind of a predisposition that I think, and we could address it just like, it's not a bad word because there are predispositions in every race. In fact, we are predisposed to be the most, how should I call it? The most tenacious. That's a good thing. So there's good and bad predispositions.
With creating an African-Canadian public policy think tank, I've seen a list of them in Washington, D.C. and see how they work and how they're able to get certain legislation passed to better benefit the economic and social and health development. Do you feel that could benefit the Black community here if we had the right structured think tank?
Absolutely. I wrote an article called had to do with unjust laws. And most of us don't know that we are where we are because of unjust laws. And even just laws apply unjustly. Okay? I've written an article, it's posted on a Nigerian website and several other websites. It has to do with unjust laws. If we did nothing else but address unjust laws, we would heal all communities, all races, all cultures. We'd heal most of the problems that we have. So you're right. If we had a think tank, I spoke to many people about unjust laws. I've written to the Prime Minister, I've written to the police chief, I've written to McGuinty, I've written to everyone about unjust laws. But people are afraid to talk about unjust laws. The church will not because they're afraid they may yank whatever from under them. I don't know why they are. It should be because they say they serve a powerful God. And I believe that too. So unless we are willing to speak to these issues, most organizations, especially when you get funded, and if you're a charitable organization, if you're a church, then you cannot criticize government. Oxfam almost had their charitable status pulled from under them because they were assumed to be criticizing government. There are 52 organizations right now being investigated. Okay, so people are afraid to speak. I say the people who can't speak are people like you and I, because we don't belong to institutions. I don't belong to, well, I belong to institutions, but like peace organizations and stuff, so they know I'm not causing trouble. But they cannot speak and they will not speak because they really do not have the will and the good, the public good at heart. And that's the reason. But this is a great example. If we can form a think tank and look at unjust laws as a first imperative, we'll be all sailing. Thank you very much, folks.